We are here, we're live, and we're going to be talking about Shakeup on the North Korean Peninsula, a little bit about the missile launch, and more about the new leadership in South Korea. And our special guest this afternoon is Mr. Ralph Cossa, the president of Pacific Forum. And Ralph, nice to have you with us on Pacific Forum's Issues and Insights once again. It's been a while.
Good to be here.
Before we get into these I think rather extraordinary developments on the Korean Peninsula, let's talk a little bit about Hilton Hawaiian Village, January 15th, the Board of Governors dinner.
I thought you'd never ask. Maybe.
Well, but this is an extraordinary event, and so why don't you tell our audience there a little bit about it?
Well, the Pacific Forum once a year has a Board of Governors dinner, which is our primary fundraising dinner. And this year, the co-chairman of our board, Richard Armitage, former Deputy Secretary of State, will be our guest speaker. All of the proceeds go to the James Kelly Fellowship Program, which brings young people to Pacific Forum to study on Korean Peninsula events. We've had young people from Korea, from the U.S., but also from all over the world, even from Europe, who have come in to study in that area, and we have a donation that matches dollar for dollar every dollar that we raise, and this is the last year of that matching fund. So it's a big event for us, both in fundraising and also in providing the local Hawaii community with an opportunity to hear a really first-class diplomat and scholar, Rich Armitage.
Armitage has had extraordinary experience in the Asia-Pacific region, hasn't he?
Yes, I mean, he was, in addition to being Colin Powell's deputy at State, he was also the Assistant Secretary of Defense previously, has been involved in some of the relief efforts. When the Soviet Union collapsed, he was our ambassador to work on Central Asian countries for relief and guidance and denuclearization in those areas. He was just recently in Japan and China with Joe Nye, our co-chairman from our board, as part of a special team sent by President Obama to talk to the Japanese and the Chinese regarding the Senkaku Diaoyu island dispute.
So it's kind of an unofficial mediator type
right,
role?
Yeah. I mean, okay. it was with the blessings of the president, so they were there to, sort of convey U.S. views and concerns without it being an official delegation.
Well, that's interesting. That means, if I can do my extrapolation correctly, that unofficially, our beloved Pacific Forum, based here in Honolulu, is the unofficial mediator, or an unofficial mediator in that.
Well, once removed. Yeah.
Once removed.
Okay. We'll try not to take too much credit for it, but our two board chairmen, we were smart enough to pick them as our board chairman, and the president was smart enough to pick them to do this
interesting
negotiating. So I guess that makes us equally smart.
Okay. Well, at the risk of getting a giant no from you, am I allowed to ask what topic Rich Armitage is going to speak on the
yes,
Board of Governors?
He's going to be talking about U.S. policy in the Asia-Pacific region, and the title is Pivot or Divot. So I guess it'll be a critical analysis of policy. And if you go to our website, www.pacforum.org, you can get information about buying tickets or call our office at 521-6745.
I mean, many of us here in the community have supported Pacific Forum and been to these events in the past, and it for those of you in the audience who have never been, and of course those of you listening on the internet who are outside the Hawaiian Islands here and cannot get to this, that's just
donations are still accepted.
That's right, donations are still accepted.
And will be matched. So.
But this is an extraordinary educational opportunity in addition to a wonderful dinner, and so I would encourage you to get to that Pacific Forum website and get over to the Hilton, and we will see you there January 15th. It's a Tuesday evening, right?
Right.
Okay. Let's jump into this shakeup on the Korean Peninsula, and we've got a new leadership and a satellite that is still orbiting, I guess.
It's orbiting, but doesn't seem to be saying anything.
Not saying it.
It's called silence is still a message.
There's an elliptical orbit, and then there's a silent orbit.
That's right.
Okay. Why don't we talk about this missile launch first, Ralph? We see things in the media that North Korea is now capable of striking the United States and all kinds of almost hysterical panic over
Yeah.
this whole thing. What's the bottom line of this whole
Well,
thing?
the bottom line is that North Korea is still a long ways away from being able to directly threaten the United States, even the Hawaiian Islands. And they've now demonstrated that they are capable of getting a missile up in the air that can potentially reach that far. Reaching that far and hitting a target are is another situation completely. And the accuracy of their missiles is somewhere in the 100-kilometer, 60-mile range. So if I was Greenpeace, I'd be worried about our whales and the safety of them if they were to shoot in the direction of Honolulu. But I wouldn't lose too much sleep if I was on Waikiki
Yeah.
Beach.
I can't remember exactly the date. Something like 40 years ago, there was a NASA recovery in the Asia Pacific region in which I believe it was a Gemini flight coming in, which was such an accurate pinpoint landing that the recovery carrier had to be moved a few hundred yards because they were concerned that the capsule was going to hit the deck. And I guess what you're saying is that North Korea is a ways off on a guidance system from that juncture.
I think they've got a pretty good chance of hitting the ocean.
Okay, well,
it's a pretty good sized target, and,
Okay.
and we shouldn't discount that. But and nobody gives them credit other than themselves for being able to miniaturize a weapon, put it on a warhead, and fire it accurately or not in that direction. So they're still a long ways away from a threat. Nonetheless, it does show that we're working in that direction. They are trying to achieve some type of an ICBM capability, and we can't dismiss that. We have to
Right.
sort of take it seriously. The day that they are, in fact, assessed as being capable of putting a nuclear weapon on a warhead and shooting it a long distance and hitting a target or near a target in the United States, that's the day that we have to start talking about preemptive strikes, and we have to start talking about other ways of defending ourselves. So North Koreans should be very careful in what they claim they're capable of doing, since the consequences, if we believe them, could be serious.
Well, one of the things that I think, you have a former senior military position in the intel field, as I recall.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we have seen over the last several decades in the development of technology is this concept of leapfrogging. As an example, you'll see it takes a country a long time to develop a landline system, and then they go into a mobile system like the U.S., and then you see the Asian countries, they forget the landline, they go directly to a mobile. And while the North Korean three-stage missile and this Gwanmyang-song satellite look very primitive today, is there some concern that they could leapfrog some technology and it won't be 30, 40, 50 years before they can?
Well, I don't think anyone thinks that it's 30, 40, 50 years before they have a capability of doing that, but it's not easy. It is, in fact, rocket science, and it's not easy. They've demonstrated that they've at least now mastered the fundamentals. They're getting a lot of help. We're not exactly sure who. There were apparently a lot of Iranians in the stand. I don't know if the Iranians were there teaching or learning, or maybe a little bit of both. Also, obviously, if the international sanctions were really working, they wouldn't have been able to launch twice this year. So clearly, they're at a minimum, someone is turning a blind eye. Someone being shorthand for China, and we need to be concerned about that as well. But at the end of the day, it still requires a lot of effort, a lot of sophistication, and a lot of outside assistance and outside technology for them to make that next leap. Again, I'm not dismissing North Korea as a threat, but the reality is the greatest threat from North Korea comes from their rockets and their missiles that are capable of reaching Seoul today. They don't need to have an ICBM to create a threat. The threat has always been there. It's always been in their long-range artillery. And that's what's essentially provided their deterrent, quote unquote. For the
Well, in fact, the
past
long-range
50 years.
artillery is really low-tech stuff left over from World
That's
War
right.
II, right?
Yeah, but low tech still kills.
Yeah, especially when it's within range.
And creates chaos, and that's what you really have to be concerned about. So,
Well, I guess the purpose for this missile launch, there are two pieces to it, and maybe we should talk a little bit about that. One of them is an internal one, and the other is, I guess, is a PR marketing for its client states that it ships weapons technology to illegally.
yeah, that's right. I think that this was as much about marketing as it was about national pride and one-upsmanship with showing the South that they could do it. Before the South has been trying to launch a satellite also, and so the North beat them to it, so they can pat themselves on the back. But they're also, they're trying to sell their technology to countries. Most of the countries who buy stuff from North Koreans, it's primarily because no one else will sell it to them. There aren't a lot of people knocking down the door to sell Iran or Syria, weapons. So the North Koreans have that advantage. But still, in order to get somebody to buy it, you've got to demonstrate that it works.
Right.
And after a number of missile failures, they very much needed a success, I think, just for marketing, for no other reason. As far as convincing the North Korean people, it doesn't matter because they claim to the North Korean people that the previous two unsuccessful launches launched satellites. They acknowledged the failure for the third one, but for the first and second one, they said satellites were launched. So from their own internal propaganda, this was just the third time they put a satellite into orbit, even though we know this is the first time they actually succeeded.
It's also confirmation and the success of 2012 as the milestone year for,
That's right, the
for
year
what is
of
it?
being strong, a rich and powerful nation, and of course it's part of the transition in leadership and a tribute to Kim Jong-il, who died a year ago today, or a year ago last week. So there are a lot of different reasons why they can pump themselves up and claim credit for this.
Well, we'll have more on the shakeup on the Korean Peninsula when we come back after the break. Stay with us, and you can join the conversation then. We're back, we're live, and this is Pacific Forum's Issues and Insights. We're talking about shakeup on the Korean Peninsula with Pacific Forum's CEO and President, Mr. Ralph Cossa. You can join the conversation by calling us at area code 808-296-5467. And I understand we have a caller, Russell, are you on the line? I wonder if we have Russell or will we lose Russell here? Maybe not. Okay. So let's us continue with our discussion here. Before the break, we were talking about this missile satellite launch, Ralph, of a recent one of North Koreans, and you had mentioned right at the break that this is heavily or principally done for internal consumption propaganda reasons, and I guess the next question is does this mean that Kim Jong-un, the new young leader, is trying to follow in the footsteps of his father, or is he a reformist, or can we tell anything from this missile launch at all?
Well, what we can tell from the missile launch is that he's not particularly inclined to listen to the Chinese when they tell him not to do something, because the Chinese presumably or reportedly were telling him not to do it, although there was a high-level visit from China to North Korea a couple of days before they announced the missile launch. So you can, if you desire to be suspicious of China, you can argue the reverse, that the Chinese are actually supporting this and are behind it. But clearly he doesn't mind confrontation, as his father didn't. He's sort of pursuing his own agenda and beating his own drum. So from that standpoint, if we were hoping that we were going to get a kinder, gentler version of the Kim family, so far we haven't seen that. He's tried to portray a softer image. He speaks. He has a pretty young wife, et cetera, et cetera. He goes to amusement parks and talks about the need to make people happy. But at the end of the day, he's still essentially following the same type of confrontational policies, disregard for UN Security Council sanctions and resolutions, as his father did.
So Ralph, you've done a lot of, spent a great deal of your career focused on issues involving the Korean Peninsula, and this incident if we look at it from the 50,000-foot level, do you see this successful missile launch as enhancing the negotiating position, strategy, strength of North Korea for future discussions?
No, I don't think so, and I'm not sure that that's what it was aimed at. It was where it will be successful. What it was also aimed at, I'm sure, was trying to drive a wedge between the U.S. and China, and we're seeing that now as the U.S. and Japan and Korea are trying to get a stronger statement from the UN Security Council in protesting this launch, and the Chinese have essentially once again blocked it. So it sort of keeps us at odds with one another, and the North Koreans have been very good at that game of playing different parties against one another. There was also some speculation that they were trying to influence the South Korean elections, presumably to help the progressives. If that was their trick, it didn't work since the progressives lost, and we have
And we'll get to that in a moment.
and we now have a conservative president-elect who will take office in February.
We have, I believe we got our technology resolved, and we've got a caller on the line now. Russell, are you there?
Hello, Russell.
Russell, are you there? Well, we tried twice. I got the signal that we had a caller in, wanted to ask a question, and so
Okay.
maybe not.
Don't give up, Russell.
Don't give up, Russell. Stay with us. All right. Well, let's shift from this discussion of the missile launch now to the new leadership in South Korea. And Ralph, would you maybe give our audience a little briefing as to what's just happened in terms of the presidential elections?
Well, first of all, it's important to remember that, like in our system, a new president is elected, but until the day of inauguration, which is mid-February, the current president is still the president. So we shouldn't, be jumping the gun and drawing a lot of conclusions about what Park Geun-hye is going to do or say until she's actually inaugurated. She's just now putting her transition team together, and will start working on the effort. She's actually meeting today with President Im Young-bak to sort of talk about the transition. It will be a smoother transition than it would have been if the progressives won, just since they're both from the same party. But there's never been a lot of love lost between the two of them. So and she, in many respects, ran against his policies, particularly the hardline nature of his policies. She was seen as more quote softer on North Korea, although not too soft, which is the complaint against progressives. But also most of the agenda was domestic, not international.
What is this more moderate lady president coming in South Korea? How is that likely to affect relations with North Korea?
Well, it's hard to say, and the reason it's hard to say is because the North Koreans have to make a decision whether or not they're prepared to work with her, or work with any leader in North Korea. They were not all that particularly helpful even when the progressives were in charge. But certainly prior to the election, they spent a bit of time bad-mouthing Ms. Park, so they were not giving her the benefit of the doubt to begin with. If they choose to want to, move forward with the South, they have an excuse now that Im Young-bak is gone, or will soon be gone. But on the other hand, if they really don't want to, and there are really no signs that they are prepared to accept South Korea as the legitimate government, and that's been the problem all along, then it's not going to really matter whether it's Im Young-bak or Park Geun-hye or even President Moon. At the end of the day, part of the North's legitimacy is based on denying the South's legitimacy.
Okay.
And as long as they continue to do that, it makes it very hard to see any kind of a breakthrough in North-South relations, even during the two summit meetings that have occurred with Kim Dae-jung and then with Roh Moo-hyun. In both cases, the North Koreans sort of portrayed this as South Korean leaders coming in to pay tribute to the North Korean leader. Now, I don't think Ms. Park's going to be dumb enough to make a third trip to Pyongyang. They're going to have to meet, I would hope, in neutral grounds if in fact there is another summit. But there are no indications that Kim Jong-un feels secure enough and confident enough that he's prepared to do a summit anytime soon, or that it would even be a wise thing for Park Geun-hye to do until she sort of consolidated her own position, given the fact that 48+% of Koreans voted against her. She still has some bridge building to do at home before she can be too dynamic abroad.
Second question related to this, the new lady president of South Korea. What's likely to happen in terms of her relationship with the United States and the alliance?
Well, I think her relationship with the United States will be good. I mean, again, she's part of the conservative party, which has been very strongly pro-alliance. You have, upwards of 80% of the people in South Korea who are pro-alliance, so there's no real challenge to, or no political courage that's required to be pro-alliance in South Korea. So I wouldn't expect that there'll be a lot of problems in that regard. There are always contentious issues. There are always issues on status of forces agreement. There are always issues regarding host nation support. There's an issue coming up on South Koreans want to develop a reprocessing capability for their nuclear fuel, and that runs against stated U.S. policy. So there'll be some sensitive negotiations there. So there are a lot of different things. Life is easier with a conservative president, but it's not easy. There's always going to be contentious issues and the need to carefully negotiate.
One of the things that occurs to me is, you see no significant changes in the relationship with the U.S. at all with Madam Park.
Yeah.
What about if we kind of take the, and we'll get to the more detail of this in a moment, but we kind of take the barrier breaking episode of her election, and as a female leader in a formerly all-male leadership society in South Korea. We'll get to that in a moment, but let's shift from the relationship with the United States now. Now let's look at the relationship between South Korea and Japan, with a woman president in South Korea, and having to deal with the Japanese who haven't yet managed to crack that barrier so far as we can see.
Well, neither have we, David. I don't think the fact that we've never had a woman president is going to make it hard for President Obama to interact with Park Geun-hye any more than it will be for Abe. The problems between Japan and Korea are going to be there regardless of gender of either leader. I have not taken the bait, which you have hung out there 3 or 4 times about the significance of a woman president. For a number of reasons.
I noticed that.
Yeah, for a number of reasons. Number one, because Ms. Park did not run as a woman candidate. She ran as the conservative standard bearer. She's also the daughter of a dictator. And there were more headlines in Asia about dictator's daughter wins than woman wins. In neither case is this, I think, particularly relevant. She's accomplished things on her own. She's a very capable politician. And quite frankly, and I mean this in the kindest way, and the reason I've been trying to figure out a good way to say this and haven't figured out, but people don't look at her as a woman or as feminine. She's a politician who happens to be a woman. She's not a woman politician.
I got you.
And as a result, it wasn't portrayed as a major step for women's rights, even though obviously it's nice to see that a woman would get the job. So I don't read a lot into it, just that fact. I mean, I think it's good. I think the fact that it wasn't a big issue says more about how far Korea has come than if we made it into a big issue. I think the difficulties that she'll have in dealing with the U.S. and the difficulties she'll have in dealing with Japan are gender is irrelevant to that. I think that there's going to be some real challenges, and they're based more on the perception of what the new Prime Minister Abe stands for and believes in than it will be on the fact that it's a chauvinist male talking with a non-chauvinist woman. So
interesting. Well, we're going to go to a break here, and When we come back after the break, we'll be talking a little bit more about the leadership change as well as some nuclear non-proliferation issues. So I want you to stay with us, and you're listening to Pacific Forum's Issues and Insights, and we will see you on the other side of the break. We're back. We're live, and you can join the conversation by calling us at 808-296-5467. We've had some technical challenges here with some callers earlier in the show, and we had one great question from one of our callers, Russell, and we're talking about shakeup on the Korean Peninsula, and among other things, the missile launch that the North Koreans have recently successfully accomplished. And our guest here is Mr. Ralph Cossa, the president of Pacific Forum. And so, Ralph, let me put Russell's question to you.
Good.
Russell says, how can we convince or pressure North Korea to abide by recent UN resolutions on nuclear proliferation?
Well, Russell, it's a great question, and it's something that our ambassador at the UN and the Korean and Japanese ambassadors are struggling with right now. The reality is that in order to pressure the North Koreans, convince the North Koreans to honor these resolutions, there has to be costs involved with them not honoring the resolutions. And thus far, the Chinese have prevented any real costs from occurring. The sanctions that were imposed after the last launch and the nuclear test a couple of years ago were supposed to preclude them getting the kind of assistance outside in technology and equipment to ever do another launch. And obviously they did 2 launches this year, which shows that the sanctions are not working. As long as there are no consequences to North Korean action, as long as they can get around the sanctions and have help getting around the sanctions, it's going to be extremely difficult to persuade the North Koreans to cooperate. We can offer all sorts of incentives for cooperating, but if there also are not disincentives or punishments for not cooperating, then the North Koreans are going to just sort of do what they wish to do, comfortable in the belief that at the end of the day the Chinese are going to sort of prop them up and protect them from any real punishment.
Russell, I hope that answers your question. Ralph, I wanted to say to you that perhaps Russell did not intend this, but implicit within that question is the notion that as we look back over the last 2-3 decades, and we see this successful missile launch, it seems rather apparent that the whole notion of sanctions vis-a-vis North Korea have been very, very unsuccessful.
Yeah, well, sanctions can either be successful or unsuccessful, depending in part on what they cover or don't cover, and in part on how tightly they're enforced. I think that it's clearly in this case that they haven't been enforced. If you had strict sanctions, not just against exports or imports, but financial sanctions as well, there was a point where we had financial sanctions where we were actually punishing banks that were dealing with North Korea. That had a very quick and a very immediate impact on the North Koreans and got their attention. Right now, the sanctions are not getting their attention. Somehow or other, the sanctions are punishment. Oh my God, I said a bad word.
I know you did. That was terrible.
Nobody wants to acknowledge
again.
that, but that's the whole point of sanctions, is
Sure.
to punish somebody for doing something wrong in order to convince them to not do it again. And if we're not prepared to enforce the sanctions, then there's no punishment involved, and then you're not going to get the kind of behavior change that you're trying to accomplish. So to me, it's not sanctions that are the problem. It's the failure to enforce them. It's the belief that the North Koreans can get away with doing essentially whatever they want to do, and at the end of the day, Uncle China's going to sort of bail them out.
Well, as long as Uncle China is the leakage or the point of leakage on the whole sanctions issue, it doesn't really matter how tight you draw the sanctions on the other countries, that the sanctions are never going to operate.
That's right. So that's why your effort has to be geared at persuading the Chinese that it's in their interest to get the North Koreans to behave. The Chinese create this sort of false dilemma. Well, we can't do this because we want stability and we don't want North Korea to collapse. You're trying to bring about regime change. Well, no, we're not trying to bring about regime change. We're not trying to convince the North to collapse. But there's got to be a happy medium between giving them everything they want and letting them do whatever they want,
Right.
and pursuing a regime change collapse scenario. And right now, there is no middle ground. The Chinese say, well, we can't do anything because otherwise it might look like we're trying to make them collapse, and therefore we're going to just keep them on life support and give them what they want. There's got to be a happy medium in the middle, and that's what we need to be talking with the Chinese about and persuading them, or we have to quit commending the Chinese for all of their help on the North Korean peninsula and say, look, China's an important country. We cooperate in a lot of different areas. We wish them well. We've certainly invested heavily in China's economic success. But when it comes to North Korea, China's part of the problem, not part of the solution. And we need to brand them as that and put some pressure on the Chinese to act responsibly. There's new leadership coming to the fore in China as well, and we need to be, I think, a little bit more candid with them.
Right.
If they want to be big kids, if they want to be respected in the international community, which seems to be their goal, then they have to act in a manner that does that. If you look around the world today, if you name the top 10 tyrants in the world, the one thing they all have in common is that China is their best friend. Well, you can judge somebody by the company they keep. I think that the Chinese need to start working on their image a little bit, and they need to, North Korea would be a very good place for them to start.
Well, China has two major problems with North Korea. One of them is in terms of any type of regime collapse. They have to deal with a severe border problem with millions of refugees, and so they
Right.
got the humanitarian problem
Yeah,
on their
and-
northern that border.
Yeah, and we hear this, David, a lot. But first of all, we're not pursuing regime collapse.
I understand.
Secondly, if the North Koreans were to suddenly try to flee, they're not going to be looking to live in the workers' paradise of China. China is an escape route to get somewhere else,
I understand.
ultimately to the south and ultimately back to the north under a new regime. The other reality is that there are more people born in China every year than live in North Korea. North Korea, if the total population of North Korea fled, 20 million people, China is a country of 1.3 billion. You could absorb 20 million and not even know they were there.
Yeah,
So
I
this
understand.
idea that somehow or other, it's going to cause China, as we know it, to collapse under the burden of a bunch of North Korean refugees. First of all, not everyone's going to flee. Those that do are going to head beyond China. If the Chinese were really serious about wanting to persuade the North Koreans to change their evil ways, quote unquote, rather than building fences to keep the North Koreans in, they ought to be building refugee camps. You ought to be sending a signal to the North Koreans that we're prepared to let you collapse. We're prepared to take on some couple 100,000 refugees for a month or two. When the East Germans fled East Germany, they didn't stay in Eastern Europe. They used the Eastern Europe escape routes and headed
Right.
for the West, with the ultimate goal of going back to a free East. That's what we're really talking about.
And I gather the Russians have done some type of training or preparation with some type of refugee stuff that they got a lot of protests from Pyongyang about.
The Russians, in my view, were fed up with the North Koreans. The Russians were very strong before the missile launch, saying that this is a violation of UN Security Council regulations. The Russians have been very strong. They've been very much supporting our position, the Japanese, the South Korean position. And I think that we sort of, in many cases, ignore the Russians, except when our Congress is trying to go out of its way to find ways to infuriate them. Which to me, how that serves U.S. national interests is beyond me. But then again, most of what Congress does is sort of beyond my ability to comprehend lately. Anyway, so just add their Russia policy to the mix.
Well, we've got more. I hope that answer satisfies. Great question. And we will be back after the break. And we'll be talking on our final segment here a little bit more about the shakeup on the Korean Peninsula. So if you'll stay with us, we'll see you on the other side of the break. We are back. And to all of our listeners in Asia on the internet and those of you on the the U.S. mainland, also listening on the internet. We want to give a shout out to all of you, and hope you're having a happy holidays, as all of us are here in Hawaii. This is the 27th of December, and we're talking about the shakeup on the Korean Peninsula with Pacific Forum's president, Mr. Ralph Cossa. Ralph, in this final piece of the program, one of the things I thought we better do before we end up, for those who joined this program a little bit late or missed the opening segment here, is just make sure that we remind everybody about the Board of Governors dinner that's coming up a couple weeks here.
January 15th. That's right. Hilton Hawaiian Village. Tickets are on sale. Tax-deductible donations to the Pacific Forum help support the Kelly Fellows program, which allows us to bring young people to work and study at the Pacific Forum. And this year is a special treat because our board co-chairman, Rich Armitage, former Deputy Secretary of State, will be our keynote speaker at the dinner. And he, for those who have not ever heard him speak, he's a dynamic speaker, very interesting. He's going to be talking about U.S. foreign policy in Asia, pivot or divot.
Pivot or divot.
I'm sure that he'll have some unique insights. He was just in China along with our other co-chairman, Jong-un, as special emissaries of the President and Secretary Clinton to talk about the tensions between China and Korea. So he's got a world of insight into all of those type issues.
And in the first segment we were talking about the role that Rich Armitage and Jong-un have been playing in that dispute is kind of like international mediators, if you will.
At least sending some strong messages, which is what's required.
The Kelly Fellows, we've been talking about the Korean Peninsula in this program. Ralph, what's the connection between the Kelly Fellowship that this dinner supports, and the Pacific Forum's work involving Korea?
Well, we have a number of fellowships at Pacific Forum. Right now we have 6 young fellows from 5 different countries, I guess, that are studying with us for anywhere from 3 months to 12 months. And we bring a number of these in. Some of them are Honda Fellows from the Worldwide Support for Development organization. Others are Vasey Fellows, named after our founder, Joe Vasey. The Kelly Fellowship was specifically set up to promote a better understanding of the significance of events on the Korean Peninsula. And we received a matching pledge from a Korean-American businessman who prefers to be anonymous, who essentially said that he'll give us $1 million if we can raise $1 million. And we're at about the 800,000 mark after 4 years, and this is the last year of our quest. So we're putting on a big push to try to raise the remaining 200,000 to get matching funds so that we'll then be able to endow the program and perpetuate it. We bring young people from around the world who are interested in Korean studies. They come, they do a research project with us at Pacific Forum. We bring them to our various conferences. Our Kelly Fellow was just with us in Vietnam last month, where we were meeting with the North Koreans and others to talk about non-proliferation and disarmament. So a unique opportunity for young people to sit down and do one-on-one with a North Korean diplomat. And these are the types of opportunities that we can provide. And what we're trying to do is inspire the next generation to be concerned about foreign policy issues and to get involved in it. We've got some great folks in public service in the foreign ministries throughout Asia and in the United States and our State Department. And we just want to help continue that drive.
So this Kelly Fellowship, do these?
Right. It's named after Jim Kelly, by the way, who was my predecessor as president of Pacific Forum and was the Assistant Secretary of State in the Bush administration, was responsible for establishing the 6-party talks, which at one point was actually moving in the direction of creating a better environment on Northeast Asia and denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula. We hope to one day be able to get back to that, and that's part of what we're trying to do.
Let me ask you a question. I don't know if you can answer this or not, but
I'll make up an answer.
Okay.
No problem.
Does Pacific Forum have its hand in potentially in the future developing fellows, male and female, that formerly lived in North Korea?
Yes, I mean we are actually trying to get some North Korean fellows, young people from North Korea, to come to our international programs. But we also have a program right now where we've identified 8 or 10 young former North Koreans, defectors who are now living either in South Korea or in the United States, who are interested in foreign policy and who are working in that field, and we're bringing them into our overall Young Leaders program, where we bring young people from around the world to our different conferences and meetings. We run 18, 20 different conferences a year all around the globe. Last year, 16 meetings in, I think, 13 different cities in 8 different countries.
So for someone who's listening to this program, has there been a Pacific Forum conference where you have brought a former North Korean defector at Pacific Forum's expense to come participate in a Pacific Forum program somewhere in the world?
Oh yes, there have been a number of them. In fact, we had one with us in Maui last year, here in Hawaii, working on U.S.-South Korea relations, and we'll probably have another one here coming up in the near future. We've got a number of young North Korean defectors who come to programs. We may have one actually serving as a Kelly Fellow in residence in Pacific Forum, where she's still sort of perfecting her English. We want to make sure that she's comfortable enough in English before we bring her here. But we have a number of young former North Koreans who are now part of this program, and we think it's essential to reach out to these young people who are the hope of their country. Hopefully, be able to go back one day and in leadership positions when North Korea truly transforms. So we're trying to work very hard. We work with the U.S. State Department and with the Ministry of Unification in South Korea to try to identify these young people and give them some both training and inspiration and opportunities to interact with their peers throughout Asia.
You know, ladies and gentlemen, you probably wondered where I was going with this series of questions with Mr. Cossa here, but I hope that from this you can see that if you have an interest in foreign affairs, and more specifically, if you have an interest in stability in the Korean Peninsula and its future, it's obvious that one of the things you can do to support these efforts is to get involved with this Board of Governors dinner that's coming up and help support this this whole Kelly Fellowship. And the website is pacforum.org, as I recall.
And if you're between 22 and 35 and interested in foreign policy and want to get involved, our Young Leaders program doesn't take you away from your job, except maybe 3 days out of every 2 months or something to go to Ho Chi Minh City or go to Singapore or somewhere else and meet with the North Koreans and do stuff like that. So there are a lot of opportunities out there. We also have internship positions available.
Right.
We have 5 or 6 terrific interns right now at Pacific Forum from a couple of different countries who are helping us. This is our version of slave labor, but they get a little bit out of it.
They get paid though, right?
Yeah, they get the opportunity to excel, and we're delighted to provide that opportunity. And again, we just believe that reaching out to the young people, to the next generation, is a moral responsibility. It's something that our founder, Joe Vasey, continues to do, and he's 95 now, so I figured us young folks...
He's almost 96.
That's right. Us young folks need to be following in those footsteps.
Right. Well, you know, Ralph, we have time for just one more question here before the show is over, and we had talked earlier about the political ramifications of Madam Park just being elected as the new president of South Korea. And if we set aside the political implications and so forth, and let's look for a moment to South Korean society. And South Korea, as you know, has never had any, maybe I'm wrong, but as far as I know, any senior ministers in their government have been women, and very, very few corporate executives at the top level have been women. And so what is your reaction to the notion that perhaps Madam Park will serve as a barrier-breaking glass ceiling reinforced with steel concrete in South Korea?
Yeah, no, I think chauvinism is now dead on the Korean Peninsula, David. We can all rejoice.
Well, that's
all right. Maybe that's a little
a little bit over the top.
No, but no, I think it's certainly a step in the right direction. I mean, I was very proud that we have a African American, half African American, Hawaiian-born president of the United States. It doesn't mean that all semblance of racism is gone in the U.S., but certainly it demonstrates where our society has has moved forward. I think that this is a very good, it's a commendable step for Korea, but it's just a step, and it's probably not going to immediately result in 20 women suddenly becoming CEOs in charge of chaebol and all of that. But it certainly will inspire young women. It will convince them that they can strive a little bit harder, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it serves as a great example, not just for Korea, but for Japan and China and other countries as well.
Well, that's about all the time that we have here. And Ralph, I'd like to thank you again for joining us on Pacific Forum's Issues and Insights. And
It's always a pleasure, David.
we'll look forward to seeing you, ladies and gentlemen, at the
January 15th.
January 15th.
Board of Governors dinner, Hilton Hawaiian Village, Rich Armitage. Don't miss it.
All right.
Tax deductible donations are
Thank
always
you.
appreciated.
Thank you and good night.